Hello, and welcome to Expedition 10 Singularity. So the first thing I would do here is jump into the settings and disable people joining my group and turn off PvP. Now, if you were trying to do this as fast as possible, you could jump into the difficulty settings and make everything, much easier. The number one thing I would recommend to people would just be turning off the space combat because that really slowed it down. Otherwise, I'd jump back in and I would do a little lap around the camp and get some silicate. That way we can unlock this Sentinel multi-tool and we can swap out the one that we start out with for the one in the case. Now, there were actually 3 different camps that you could start at. All of them were fine. They all had their little pros and cons. One of the 3 camps had a multi-tool that didn't have a weapon already installed in it, so you do end up having to make that later, but it's not a big deal. You mainly just have to get more chromatic metal. So the first thing I would do is just try and reorganize this stuff. I usually prioritize the jetpacks, and then on the multi-tool you can break the visor and the scanner because the other multi-tool will have that installed. You honestly probably didn't need the terrain manipulator, but just in case you needed it to gather some copper or whatever, I usually just hung on to it and put it back in the new one. And that was why I hit the silicate first from the ground, because then you can immediately charge up the terrain manipulator, at least enough to get more if you need it. So from there, I would continue making my way around the camp and emptying all the scrap. At some of the camps, you would get things like this tainted metal. That was great. It quickly became clear that the main thing in the early game was actually getting nanites, because you needed to be able to buy the hyperdrive upgrades as quickly as possible, and you were only stopping at so many stations, so you really only had a chance or two to even get the nanites. And honestly, one of the other camps was much better than this one, and we'll get to that. I'll show you the other 2 camps at the end of the video if you're curious to see how different the starts were. But once you had completed that first quest, you could jump down here. Now, I'd kind of found a little path where I could grab a few things that were valuable to sell and could also get just the basic materials you needed to get the first quest done. The first few times doing this, I tried to gather as much of the materials up front as I could, but I pretty quickly realized that it was actually better to just grab some things that were valuable and just get the basics you needed to get your ship off the ground. And throughout the rest of the expedition, you got enough units to be able to buy stuff from either the exchanges or from other pilots or stuff like that. So there wasn't really much of a need to farm once you got going. There were a couple of things that you just couldn't buy from vendors or whatever, so you did have to grab those, but otherwise it was pretty straightforward. The nice things about this camp were that it was pretty quick to get to your ship. There was lots of these crates, so you pretty much get all of the materials you needed without having to farm anything. You also got the microprocessor and an ion battery right away, so that saved you from having to buy those at the next stop. So again, there was plenty to grab around here. There was plenty of dihydrogen, there was a few oxygen plants, which was more than enough to get me through the entire expedition. There was some condensed carbon around. There was actually this large copper deposit right on your path. And there were multiple caves if you wanted to farm the cobalt, but I found just buying it from the exchanges later was easier. These crates here didn't end up being super necessary, but they did have some valuable things to sell in them, and they also just added to, overall like carbon and stuff like that. So this one here did have a life support gel, which you need 2 of those much later, so it was good to knock one of those off the list as well. From here to the next station was pretty straightforward. There were a few extra things that you could grab. You could get the Gravitino balls here, but you do get those as a quest reward, so it didn't really save you much. They are valuable to sell, but then you have to kind of drop the sentinels before you can get in your ship. One of the things I did try out here, because you do have a decent weapon, was actually getting the sentinel kills here. But because you don't have any upgrades to any weapon, it ended up being a lot slower, so I stopped doing that a couple runs in. Now, this was by no means trying to go for a speed run. I was really just seeing how efficient I could get the run, and I know that seems similar to a speed run, but it wasn't always just like what's the fastest thing. It was just kind of what's the easiest thing. Sometimes easy meant fast, sometimes it didn't. Every time I did these runs, I would always still try and take a look, around in every direction and see if there was maybe something I missed on previous runs. I would guess that I probably did each camp start maybe 5 or 6 times all the way through. And then from there, I also did complete runs maybe about 15 times. Every single time I did a run, I had a notepad open next to me and I was just taking notes on what things I didn't have enough of at certain points, and so I would make a note for myself, okay, you need to have more of this by this certain point. I also, on a lot of the early runs, checked out every vendor, every pilot, and just saw what I could buy. And if I realized, at this station you can buy this, I would just scratch it off my list completely as a thing I needed to farm. And that really helped cut down the time. Now here towards the end, it was actually pretty easy to grab some of these Gravitino balls because you could just dip into the little buildings there and drop the sentinels very easily. Sometimes they would actually fall off before you even went anywhere, so like this time they never even saw me. Now, again, I would dip into here because there was nanites, and I know it was a small amount, but every bit helped, I found. There also was some easy carbon in these planter boxes. That was for sure one thing I realized, that if you grabbed carbon out of those at these little buildings or in the space stations, you pretty much didn't need to farm any through the whole mission. There was also lots of rewards throughout the expedition that you could claim and then break the upgrades, the technology upgrades and stuff, but I just found I didn't end up really needing it, and it wasn't really saving me any time. So I was actually surprised after a lot of trial and error how many of the quests you actually don't even need to complete or claim the rewards on. In order to complete the expedition, really all you had to do was just do the quests. So the only thing you couldn't get at this camp was actually the crystal sulfide. There was one other camp that you couldn't get it at, and then the third camp, which I guess that was the trade-off, the third camp that to me was probably the best, actually did have them right there as well. So I also did a lot of playing around here, trial and error with what things to upgrade. I at first was doing a lot of upgrading the pulse because I figured you're doing a lot of short range flying between planets and space stations and stuff like that. But in the end, really, I realized all that mattered was cutting down the number of jumps you needed to do. And even though the jump animation doesn't count towards your game time, it was still just my time, and I was trying to make these as fast as possible for myself. So I did find that it was a little less annoying to have to make as many jumps. So I started prioritizing the hyperdrive and putting that in the supercharge slot, and then also only buying upgrades for the hyperdrive, and then when you get to the quest for the sentinel kills, I would also upgrade the weapon. So that's a bit of the thought process behind how to get the expedition going. From here out, it's pretty straightforward. So I'm going to go ahead and let you kind of watch, and I'll chime in when I think there's something of note. Again, this was not going for a speed run per se. I know a lot of people in the end ended up going back and forth on whether it was faster to try and buy Gamma Root or to just farm it from the planets. I was just so annoyed by the storms on the second to last planet that I just did not like doing that, and I saw afterwards that a few people had flown to different systems or different planets to farm the Gamma Root, but again, I didn't want to do all the hyper jumping, so I was fine with it being a little bit slower and hanging out at these stations to just hope that I could buy all of the Gamma Root and the Vesium that I needed. Sometimes that would go actually really quickly, and sometimes it just wouldn't. think in this run, I ended up kind of giving up towards the end because it was just taking so long. So I did end up having to fly to one small field of gamma root, but it, in the end, didn't take too long. Now, this first exchange did have a number of the things that you would end up needing later, but I didn't mark them down here because not everybody was going to collect the same items or have the same amount of money to spend here, and you really didn't need them till much later in the entire chain, so I just left those items as purchases that needed to be done by a later point, and so I will make note of them later, but you can get some of them here. Now, in case you weren't aware, on these planets where they have the storms, the pilots actually would stop landing at the archives. There's an archive here, and then there's one at Rendezvous 3, and the pilots would actually just hover in the air and would completely stop landing if it was storming. So if that happened, you either just had to find something else to do quest-wise, or you just had to wait. So I for sure, if I landed at this one and it was under an anomaly or whatever and the pilots weren't landing, I would just move on. Now, here was one of the first things that I had to learn by trial and error. I ended up wanting to use the first Atlas system, but I realized that it wouldn't show you on the galaxy map if you weren't able to select that quest. Now, the problem was that you couldn't select that quest as your next one you wanted to go on if you hadn't made the head yet. So I was leaving off making the head until much later, but then I realized that then it would send me to some totally other system for the Atlas, and it was a lot further away. So in the end, I ended up just making the head here, and you'll see that this is pretty important. You have to complete this quest here, and then that will let the Atlas quest here, the Prayer 1, pop up. You select it, go into the galaxy map, and then now it will highlight that atlas location on your map. And then I also, just so that I could mark the first rendezvous completion, I would select that one and go into the map as well, just so that I could see both of those marked. So even if you move on to other quests, those icons will still stay on those systems, so you know where you're going to go later on. But through a lot of trial and error, I eventually realized that you didn't need to do any of the atlases until after you had made the entire construct. So I would just leave all of the atlas quests and making the seeds until after Rendezvous 5, and what that let me do was just do all of the atlas quests at one time, which we'll see later in the video. So you can see with no hyperdrive upgrades, we have to make like 3 jumps, and a couple of the later ones where it's really long as well, you end up having to make 2 or 3 jumps each time, which ended up adding to how many space battles you ended up having to have and all this extra stuff. So for me, really getting rid of that was the best. I did end up finding that this station at this next jump here did have the best upgrades, so I would always go out of my way to jump into this one. And you needed to jump to a middle point anyways in order to get to Rendezvous 2. The other really interesting thing I realized was that you don't need to complete Rendezvous 1 basically until the very end. Nothing relies on it, so there's actually no reason to do it. And we'll see as we get to later in the video that I ended up always having time left on Polo's timer, and I just kept trying to find things that I could remove from the earlier part of the process so that I could get to starting Polo's timer as quickly as possible. And then during that 10-minute timer, I would do all the other stuff. But even the way I ended up working out, I still end up having like minutes left that there is nothing else to do, and we'll see it when we get there. So anyways, when we come into this station, I try and make sure I get all the hyperdrive upgrades I can. If you have one of the other camp starts that has lots of nanites, you can actually get multiple hyperdrive upgrades right here, and you're basically set for the rest of the expedition. But as you can see, I only had enough nanites for the B upgrade and not the S, so that really limits the jumping. But you do get them as rewards later, and you also will get more nanites as you go, so it's not a huge deal. This exchange here ended up being the only one that had the dihydrogen jellies for sale, so I always made sure to grab those here. They were easy to make, but it's faster to just buy them. So as we'll see here, the major issue I kept running into was this thing of targeting something and then trying to pulse to it, and it would just send me somewhere totally else. So you see there's just hundreds of markers, and even though from space it only shows you the rendezvous one or maybe one or two other ones, it didn't matter what I tried, it would not take me to what I was clicking on. So this one was pretty straightforward. If the marker did jump, which most of the time it was supposed to jump when you got close to it, sometimes it wouldn't, and that would throw me off. But if the marker did jump, then you would see this little U-shaped hill here in the middle, and if you looked down in one of the directions, you would see some kind of, I guess, worm tunnels or whatever. And if you followed straight across the worm tunnel, then you would just see the camp in front of you on this next little hill. But you'll see here, I think this one didn't jump possibly, so it was throwing me off because there were multiple little hills that had that little split in it. So sometimes it was hard to tell if I was starting from the right starting point or not. So it was pretty quick to see if you went just a little way and there wasn't another hill to the left there, that it wasn't the right one. I actually just flew over here because I was curious what that little building was. It ended up being a exosuit upgrade, which you don't need for this. So this was another little visual bug here, was that the camps a lot of times would be floating in the air, so if you kind of were looking at the spot, sometimes it would look like there was nothing there, and then that would confuse me because I would think, no, that's not the right spot, but then the camp would drop into place and it would be. So this camp you had to do both the console and the autophage, so the codes are here. One main thing I did realize pretty quickly was that if you didn't have the pilgrimage quest selected in your log, then it wouldn't complete. So that was a little thing you had to be aware of. So that was it at this planet. Just hit those two spots and continue on. From here I would jump straight to Pilgrimage 3. Now you'll see I am collecting a couple of the quests. I would only complete the ones that had rewards that I needed later on. Everything else, it was fine to just leave. So even though you are pretty tight on inventory space, if you didn't collect most of the quests, it was pretty easy to keep that managed. That was always another fun bug, was that when those little ships would pop up and want your help or, want to trade or something, they would actually like push your ship. So that would get annoying at times. Now here, I did end up trying to use up some of the space upgrades, and that was only because later on I kept getting scanned for valuable cargo, and if I had any of those in my inventory, then it would start a battle. So I started trying to make a point of either using them up when I was at a station or even just deleting them so that I wouldn't have that, but it still sometimes didn't seem to matter. I would still get into some of those battles. But again here, now you should have over 1,000 nanites, so you can buy both hyperdrive upgrade and also upgrades for whatever weapon you're using. I just went with the default boltcaster because it's easy to use and I knew the upgrades were there for it. So again at this station, if you do have the units to make some purchases, there are a few of the quest items at these terminals. Feel free to grab them there, otherwise you can get them later. Now, one big thing here is that in most of the cases, both your ship and your multi-tool will have one supercharge slot. You definitely want to make sure that you are always putting whatever you need for your current quest into that supercharge. So if you're doing the Sentinel battles, you need to make sure you put your weapon into that supercharge slot. It makes a huge difference in how long it was taking to kill the Sentinels. And likewise, if you're doing jumps and stuff, you need to make sure that those hyperdrive upgrades or the drive itself or whatever's in the supercharge slot. So you can see this one now, if we didn't get those hyperdrive upgrades, that would have taken like 2 or maybe even 3 jumps, but because we got those upgrades, we're able to do it in 1. So I think you'll see here again, the only thing we can see is the icon for the rendezvous point, but you can see it's saying something else there. It's saying someone's base. But if you click on it, you see the little icon kind of blink like that's where you're heading. But if you watch, it'll just take me somewhere totally different. It's for sure one of the things that I hope Hello Games can kind of look at, address, but they need to make it much more clear that like whatever you are targeting to pulse to or warp to or whatever, that's where you go, not some other random place. Now this one, if you are flying straight to the camp, if you see once the icon jumps, you should see this archive right to the side of it, and that is basically south. So if you are going straight to the camp, you basically would just turn north and then fly a little bit east of north. And if you went forward, you would see kind of a bit of a hill that then just is running perpendicular to the direction you're flying. And if you go to the right edge of that hill and then off it a little bit, the camp is right there. It's basically northeast from this archive. But the main thing for me was if I flew into this planet and a storm was going, then I would know that the ships wouldn't be landing. And so I would go straight to the camp. And if you don't have the crystal sulfide yet, you can use the gravitational anomaly as a quick way of travel. There's tons of water around this area. You can just quickly hop over to water and grab your 3 crystal sulfide. Then while you're traveling, you can do the radiant shards and the Atlantidium, and you can also even start on the sentinel kills if you have your weapons sorted out. But if it is not storming, then I would come straight to this archive here and try and buy the rest of the gamma root and Fecium if I didn't have it yet. Now this is also the spot where I would buy the last couple of items that I needed that I could get from stations, such as the hydraulic wiring and the magnetic resonator and things like that.
Units received.
Now, if you were doing the Atlantid head, you could also buy the antimatter housing that you needed and the wiring loom, but the wiring loom you actually didn't need to buy. You could just break any one of the upgrades that they give you, and almost all of them gave you a free wiring loom. I also would try and grab a launch fuel from here because I would inevitably always at least run out one time.
Received. Product received.
So you can see it's storming now, so there's no point in hanging out and waiting for ships. You kind of just have to move on. So I would just continue on to trying to get these other quests done here while the storm was going and it was quick to travel around. Now at this point, we don't need any more money, so I was not prioritizing grabbing anything that was valuable. We could have grabbed that navigation data back there. There's usually at least one upgrade chart, but again, we just didn't need it at this point. So you can see I'm hopping over to a nearby body of water, trying to grab some of these crystals as I go, and then jumping in the water for the sulfide. So now you'll see that since it's still storming, I'm going to skip the archive and continue on and get the rest of these quests done. And I did have a feeling the storm was about to end, so I figured I would head back here and just kind of wait for it to be over. Now, of course, if you were doing a speed run, you wouldn't do anything where you were just sitting waiting, but
Storm clearing.
so it did end up being good timing. The storm was just ending, so I figured I would hang out here, wait for a round or two of ships, and see if I could get the rest of that gamma route.
Product received.
Now, again, at this point, it was not faster to do this than to just farm it, but I just really did not like farming in those storms. So I think at this point I was just kind of annoyed that it was taking so long, so I decided to just move on. But you can see there, we kind of flew just a bit northeast, and there was the ridge that kind of ran along, and then it just ended up being here just past that. So I was trying to see, I thought I had remembered there was a spot where there were some sentinels. I was actually going to test on this run, starting out getting the first couple of kills with the ship and then landing before the sentinel ships flew into battle, but I didn't see anything right there, so I just decided to scrap it and do it on foot. So this camp, you didn't need the console, just the autophage. So again, you can see there, I tried to do the autophage, but because I didn't have Pilgrimage 3 selected, it didn't complete, which then meant I couldn't talk to the autophage. So you don't need to have the quest to talk to the autophage selected, but you do need to have completed the pilgrimage. Now, there was one little trick that I realized at this camp, which is why I ultimately decided to do the sentinel kills here most times, was because you could kind of cheese it and be on the roof of one or two of these buildings, or actually on the bigger roof, and some of the ground sentinels couldn't attack you, and all you have to do is kind of just avoid them. So it did make the combat a little bit easier without having to like run around, especially during the storms, because every little jump and then you'd go flying off, and it was nice to keep distance, but I found myself constantly flying into, either holes in the ground or landing on spiky plants or, all kinds of stuff. So again, because the gravitational anomaly was going on, I could kind of just cheese it here and shoot the easy ones and just kind of avoid the big ones' attacks, and that made it pretty quick. Then the only reason you had to leave was to drop your threat level. So of course, when I would get to 4, I didn't want the big ones to start coming in, so I would have to let my level drop back down and then reset it again. But I did find it was pretty easy from this location. You could kind of just kill them here, and then once you hit level 4, then I could run up to this little hill, which we'll see in a second, and hide behind there. So once we hit level 4 there, I would have to duck out, and these little hills here were a nice easy spot to run up and hide behind, and I could most times safely just sit back here until it went away. So once we got that done, it was off to Pilgrimage 4. So the thought process here was, I initially was working my way through in order the way that they would present the quest to you. The first thing that I realized was the Atlas part, that you didn't have to do that in 5 separate trips, that you could do it all in one. So of course I decided to leave that until I could do them all at once, which meant you had to do all 5 rendezvous before you could go to the Atlas and get all 5 done. Now, I wasn't 100% sure because I couldn't quite get it to work right. You actually could have probably done all 5 atlases after Rendezvous 4. In theory, it should have worked, but for some reason I couldn't ever get it to work properly. Sometimes I would go there and it wouldn't let me turn in Prayer 5. So in the end, I ended up just scrapping that and doing the 5 rendezvous. But the point was, I was trying to start that polo timer as quickly as possible because waiting that 11 minutes out was the longest thing. So I basically tried to get all 5 rendezvous done as fast as possible so that I could go and start that 11-minute timer. And then the things that I didn't have to do in order to start that timer was all of the Atlas stuff, and then also the Rendezvous 1 completion, and then of course there's the couple of quests that were after, like the seeds. So what I ended up doing was doing the 5 rendezvous straight away, then starting that polo timer, then going out and doing the Atlas stuff, then coming back, and then going out and completing the seeds quest for Nada, and then also just knocking out that Pilgrimage 1 completion all in the end. I'm sure there could have been a bit of shuffling to make it a bit faster. There had to have been some other way to do it, but I didn't really want to watch any of the speedrunners' videos until I was done, so I did work all of this out first, and then once I had filmed a few runs that I thought were good, I kind of picked the one that most kind of completely showed my general idea that I had worked out. And then once I had those recorded, then I started kind of watching to see some of what other people were doing. And it didn't really seem like anyone was doing anything crazily different. They were just doing it much faster than I could. And I by no means am a speedrunner, so I was happy with that. So this one was basically just landing there and doing that, and now this is your chance to complete the gamma route. Thankfully it wasn't storming, and I kind of had found a few of these spots that were easy to get to and land. The main problem on this planet was landing. Most of the places where the gamma route fields were on the sides of hills and stuff like that, so it was really hard to find somewhere to land, and then you had to like fly up or down a hill to get to them. So I found these 3 different little fields, and most of the time I had bought enough that those 3 would finish me out. Thankfully this one I only needed like another 100 or whatever, so I got that all from one field and was good to go. So this was another thing that I found kept happening, was that I clearly had the Pilgrimage 5 selected. I went out, opened my inventory for a second, and then it just completely selected another quest. I'm not sure why it does that, but that was a thing that kept happening to me repeatedly. This one also kept happening, that it would say it was removing me from Pulse because of a large ship, but I could not see any ship around me. So this was usually a spot where I would get scanned, and if the scan went off and you didn't immediately get to the ground and land, then you couldn't land, so they would just chase me around the planet. So I found that it was actually just faster to, if they found valuable cargo, I'd just flip around and have to blow up the ship, and then I could move on.
Ships approaching.
Now, normally you would get the earlier freighter battle, but that was usually easy to just dip into a freighter itself or into a space station, and that would just clear the combat, which was fine with me.
Hostile ships defeated.
So this one again was pretty easy to find. Even if it was storming, it was usually okay. Every once in a while I'd get a little mixed up, but from the marker, if the marker jumped, you would just go basically northeast again, and you would see here in front of me there's a bit of this dead ground, and it would be just to the right of that. So again, now we're just to the point where we don't need anything anymore. We're just trying to complete the quests. So here's the point where I started testing a lot of shuffling around, of calling the Atlas in immediately, but then I would have to do a hyper jump in order to get to the next quest. I don't know, I tried shuffling lots of different ways. When I eventually did watch some of the speedrunners, they were all kind of doing it slightly different ways. I don't know what would have really made this easier or faster. For me, I found that basically just going to this station, which did take a few seconds, but then going back to the initial kind of starting area near those systems, then I would just do the Atlas back there and all the other quests. But I do think that there could have been a much faster way to do this. I just really didn't have the time in the end to, you had to get so far into the questing in order to test this part of it. And if you messed it up, you were getting in and out of your ship, so I would keep making restore points, and the only way to get back and try something different would be to basically start completely over. And so again, I did end up doing at least 15 full runs, but in the end I just kind of ran out of time to test it. So there's plenty of exchanges and pilots in both of these stations to buy whatever you're missing. I found that frequently I would be short of dihydrogen or the ionized cobalt, so I would grab those things here, although the dihydrogen you'd have to get on the next planet. I did notice that some people were building a base computer, which you get after, I think, the third pilgrimage. They were just building a base so that they could warp back to their base. I guess that could have been a few seconds faster or whatever. I don't know particularly. I didn't try that method out myself because I didn't see that until after I was done filming these, but nonetheless, I did find that coming back here to this set-in system, if I summoned the Atlas here, then the Grand Divergence quest would pop up in this same system, so I could just fly straight down to a planet and do the monolith kind of thing there. So I wasn't really sure if it was a good thing or a bad thing, but one thing I did notice very quickly was in various runs, I tried summoning the Atlas at multiple different systems, and most of the systems I would summon it at, then where it would send me to do this quest, there would be, 100 comm balls all slammed all around, and it was honestly kind of annoying. I wish there was a way to just hide other players' comm balls, and crazily enough, the thing I literally don't understand is that, I guess if the comm balls are only supposed to be for you to leave messages for other people, but I find it super odd that there's no way to leave messages or locators for yourself. I really wish they would just put in simple beacons where you can leave a note for yourself, like, hey, there's this item here or whatever, and you can fly in and see what was there, or especially at different stations or whatever, so you can leave a note for yourself, like, hey, there's a cool fighter here or something like that, But the one thing I did notice was that this location, I went to this one maybe 3 or 4 times, and I never saw a comm ball at it, so either I was the only one trying to do this quest in this system, or maybe just the people that were doing it here were not the comm ball kind of people. But I really do wish that there was just a simple toggle for seeing other players' comm balls or not. I would love to just be able to hide them and have them not show up, because for the most part, I don't think I've ever seen anything of value written in a comm ball, and sometimes I've seen some pretty offensive things written in them, and I know eventually they get deleted or whatever, but still would just rather not see that stuff. But if somebody does know a way to leave yourself a note at a location that you can find again later, because if you leave a comm ball, then you leave and come back, you can't see your own comm balls, but oddly enough, you can see everybody else's. So I don't know what the deal is there, but everything else doesn't work in quantity. So if you have a base on a planet and you want to set yourself some locators of where a portal is and where all the exchanges are and stuff like that, then you can't really do it because there's a limit to how many like save beacons you can have or how many different bases you can have and all that kind of stuff. Like nothing really works. So now that we have got the timer cooking, we can jump in, and you'll see we just jump in and do all 5 Atlas quests at once. I was actually surprised to see that a few of the speedrunners didn't figure this out until much later. I don't know if they just thought they had to stay on the rails of, the quest progression, but seemed pretty obvious to just, kind of that you could select whatever quest you wanted to do unless the text was scrambled. So, yeah, this was one of the first kind of shortcuts that I fell into. The other one that was actually pretty interesting was the Atlantid sphere. I don't remember how I stumbled across that, but I think I was actually just trying to fly away from it at one point. I think most of the times I was getting like radiant shards from it and stuff like that, but I think 1 or 2 times it didn't ever pop up for me until the very end, and then I got the Echo Seed and I realized, oh, I can just get them from that. So I saw a lot of people were flying down to planets and having to fly around and look for a location and then scan and all that stuff. But I did notice that a few of the people that were trying to do that weren't able to, so I don't know if it was because they didn't have the right quest selected, or maybe there was a quest that they hadn't completed yet, which was why it wasn't giving them those as a reward, but not sure. So one of the things that I did figure out before I found out doing all 5 at once was that if you did visit a station, because at a few points I was trying it where I would do maybe Pilgrimage 3 and then summon the Atlas and then would come back, but I did realize that once you did some of the quests here and then tried to come back, that Atlas station was now dead, so you couldn't do any more quests at that. You had to fly to a different Atlas station. So another odd thing here was that even once you had completed those quests, they would stay scrambled for a while. It didn't really matter because you didn't need to complete any of the Atlas quests anyways. The only ones that you did have to do were the seeds, and that was just because you needed the final seed for the construct itself. So here I did make a mistake. I didn't actually mean to go into the Atlas. I'm not sure why even. I think I was just kind of running on autopilot at this point, but that did waste a little bit of time. But you can see here, even at this point, I still have 6.5 minutes left. So literally doing all of the Atlas basically took me 4 minutes. So I still have tons of time left, but here's where I kind of got stumped because literally everything else is done. The only thing I don't have is this completing the Pilgrimage 1 or Rendezvous 1. So even doing all of the Atlas and doing this Rendezvous, that didn't take 11 minutes. So there weren't any other quests that I could push after starting the Polo timer. So I'm not really quite sure what people were doing to kind of shuffle that in their time. I'll go and watch, a few of the big guys' videos and just kind of take a look. But I was really curious because felt like there was something I was doing wrong. There shouldn't have been literally like complete minutes of just nothing to do. But you'll see here that even with that kind of little goof of flying into the anomaly on accident, I did all of the Atlas, which you couldn't do until after you started the timer. You needed to start the timer as quickly as possible. So I left all of the Atlas quests for after, and I left this one for after, and there are literally no more quests left except for the ones after the timer. So I wasn't really sure how to make better use of this portion of time. Again, I thought maybe Rendezvous 5 could have been done after I started the Polo timer. That would have been one more thing that would have just taken those maybe an extra 3 or 4 minutes. But again, I just couldn't quite make that work. I just sometimes couldn't get the timer to start until after Rendezvous 5, so I don't know if that was on purpose or maybe sometimes I was just getting it to bug out, or I'm not sure. Anyhow, you'll see I just completed the Pilgrimage 1 there and did all of the Atlas while the 11-minute timer was running, and I literally still have 3.5 minutes left, so I for sure could have done another quest if there was a way to shift it to after starting the timer, but I just ran out of time to figure out what quest could have been pushed to after starting the timer. So anyways, I'll spare you sitting here and watching me waiting for 3.5 minutes. So I'm just going to make the seeds real quick and then I'll fast forward. So again, I kind of just double checked through the list here to just make sure I didn't forget anything. Just making sure I have everything crafted that I need to make, making sure I have the items I need for the last couple of quests, and again, basically just killing time. So you can see there, literally everything is done, and we're just waiting on this timer. I did already do both head quests, but I wanted to this time tack on doing the Atlantid one so you could see it didn't really add any more time or effort to it. You just had to make sure you bought the 2 items that you needed. But from here out, you're more or less done. All you have to do is just go out and get those seeds.
Technology installed.
So again, I don't know if this was something you were supposed to do or if it was just kind of an accident, but I noticed that a lot of people were flying down to planets and scanning and doing all this stuff in order to get these seeds, and I realized that you could just get both of them from this thing here. I think the first few runs I did talk to it and I saw it was just giving me junk, so I think a lot of times I was literally skipping over it completely. I think once or twice I did blow it up and that didn't give me anything, so. The one thing I did kind of find a little annoying about the expedition was I totally understand it having to be done on a new save, and I actually prefer that. But they give you a lot of rewards like these base decoration items and stuff like that. Like, unlocking the appearances and stuff, that's awesome because you can do that on any of your other saves. So that seems great. But you did also get a lot of rewards like the base decoration items and stuff like that. Unless you wanted to keep this totally other save and start over, which I don't really know who would want to do that. Seemed really odd to give you rewards on something that I'm sure probably the majority of people are going to delete. So I don't know, I wish they would have made those rewards something that you could just unlock on your main save and then just get like a little packet of all these base decoration items, and maybe you can only claim it once, or I don't know, maybe claim it on every character. I don't know. But anyways, I did think that was odd. But this is it. So once you got those 2 seeds, you drop them in the terminal prime, and then you get the collective, and you can throw all that into your construct. Then you can choose the Atlantid reactor or just soothe with the other one, and that gives you one of the 2 heads. And I did just play through this so many times that I did both of the heads, but I did see some people saying that they would basically complete it once, and you basically just get right up to that point where you turn in the quest to choose your head. And before you do that, you create a save at your ship, go in, turn in the head, you get the unlock, but then you reload from your save and then do the other head, and then you get both. But here it is, all 5 phases complete. And again, there was a lot of wasted time there. I wasted a ton of time looking for the gamma root from the pilots, and also had 3.5 minutes where I was sitting, waiting, doing nothing. But even with all that, still not too bad for not really going for a speed run. You can see I have an hour and 6 minutes there. That's not great compared to the speedrunners, but for me, I felt happy with that. So anyhow, let's take a look at the other camps in case you didn't see those. So this camp here was actually my favorite one to start at. I won't describe everything, but again, I would do the same thing at all of them. This camp was the one camp that didn't have a weapon, so again, just meant a little more materials you had to get. But I did notice that a lot of the speedrunner guys weren't even using the bolt caster anyways. They were going with one of the other weapons that had a bit of splash damage and stuff like that. So I guess if you weren't going to use the bolt caster, then this really was the best camp to start at. So the main drawbacks of this camp were the no weapon in the multi-tool, and there also wasn't a crate to get like the ion battery out of, so I would grab just the starting cobalt there and a bit of ferrite so that I could make that. You couldn't buy that at the next station, but you could buy the materials to make the battery, so it wasn't like a huge time saver or anything. I would just do it because it was easy to grab those. But this did have everything else like in spades. There was crystal sulfide both in the water here on the right and then also on the left. There was a horror down there in the water, so that, gave you an item that was worth a lot to sell. There's also a few of these sunken items that are worth a ton, and the big thing, which we'll get to in a second, which was that there was this abandoned camp and you could get hundreds of nanites from it. So to me, this really was the best camp to start at. other thing here, I'm not sure if it was really a good use of time or not. It probably might have been, honestly, rather than waiting for the pilots. But these fish were a really easy way to get the mordite, and you could turn that into the fecium. But a side bonus is that they dropped this flesh that was worth a ton of money as well. So it kind of killed two birds with one stone of getting you some starting money and got you one of your quest items that you either had to, farm or sit around waiting for pilots and stuff anyways. So it was a really great starting point. You could get more than enough money and also nanites and most of the items you needed to start for the quests and stuff, so it was super good. The only thing that was annoying was about halfway through the expedition, somebody built this base on top of this camp, and so it made it difficult to fight these things to get these eggs for the nanites. I would try and fly away from them, and I would keep crashing into the roof of this building, and then it would knock me back into them, and I was getting kind of frustrated with that. So I started just kind of dipping into this building here and just hiding out, and sometimes I would have to sit in here and wait for my shields to recharge, whatever, so it was kind of annoying. Every once in a while, sometimes I would click on this terminal on accident, just trying to loot these boxes and stuff, and that also was frustrating. So anyways, that was about it at this camp. Yeah, these larval cores were pretty awesome because they were worth a ton, but honestly the nanites were much more valuable, so I would always just use those to make nanites and then sell like the hadal cores and stuff like that. So that was about it at this starting camp. From here out, it's all exactly the same. So we'll kind of finish up here. I'll show you what I walked away with in very little start time, and still were able to, walk away with tons of nanites and cash.
Component prepared. Component prepared. Component prepared. Component prepared.
Okay, so let's take a look at the third and final camp that you could have started at. So this camp here was actually very similar to the first one that we started at in the main run. You went up and over a hill to get to your ship versus way down a hill to get to your ship, but it had tons of crates that you could grab. I ended up not really grabbing a lot of them on this run, but you got the basics. You could get an ion battery, you could get a microprocessor, you could get a few things to sell. But there was actually another trick here, which we didn't do in this run just for time. I was trying out something different, but I'll show you when we get to the end here. this camp did have a B-class multi-tool and it did have a weapon installed, so you could start doing the sentinel kills at this one if you wanted. The weapon wasn't strong enough being a B-class and only having the weapon in it and no upgrades. So in the end I didn't end up liking doing it here, but you could have if you wanted to. So again, there was more than enough of everything you needed. There was a cave right there at the start. There was some condensed carbon. There was plenty of dihydrogen. There was a couple of buried technology modules, which were worth, a ton. The salvaged modules to sell at the exchange. You can see there's lots more condensed carbon and dihydrogen here. But the main things were just knocking these out of the way. Now, it wasn't like the microprocessor cost a lot, but it was just nice to get that out of the way. And same if you did, grab the crate with the ion battery. It's just nice to have those things done and not have to have the money to buy them. So you can see we got a Viking effigy there, and there's a buried technology module here. Those are all great items to sell, and they give you more than enough. But the final trick here was that there was this little sentinel camp here, which none of the other ones really had anything like this. But this had items in it that were worth a ton. So if you really just wanted to go ham and buy everything, you could just skip all of the earlier stuff we did, run straight down here, blast those open. Then you just got to kind of run away from the sentinels, till they clear out, and then you basically are done. So you wouldn't need to grab these microprocessors or pick up any of the other stuff. You could basically just get enough of the, carbon and ferrite, whatever you needed to do the first 4 quest items, and then get out of here. There also was a copper node over here to the side. Sometimes I would grab the copper there, and sometimes I would just leave it for later and buy it. But you can see these canisters here. We'll take a look here in a second. But you can see there's some more, buried technology modules around if you missed one or didn't have enough. But yeah, these things here, they had enriched carbon, lemium, all that stuff. So if you broke those and then just ran to reset the sentinels, then you would be sitting pretty with a lot of cash to spend. But the main thing that this camp didn't have was a lot of nanites. So you can see we got some tainted metal, and other than that, there wasn't really a lot. So it did make it tough to start out. So I'll leave you with a few of the fails here. There was more than this for sure. So everything from animals goring me in the side, to flamethrowers to the side of my face, all the way to jetpacking into spiky traps. So I'll leave you with this little word of wisdom. Thank you very much for watching to the end. I hope you come back and check out some more in the future. Bye.